All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to year two. This is year two of the State of Black Detroit. This is a discussion between myself and Yusef Shakur. I have some questions for Yusef about many things happening in and around the city of Detroit. My name is Khary Frazier. This is Detroit is Different, but we're also collaborating with Mama Akua House. So till 2 o'clock, we will be here at Mama Akua House. And if you haven't been over here, this is definitely what we are now labeling as community houses and a lot of the organizing, but really this is spaces designed for our people, by our people, and more so with the resources of community. So the community is definitely centered here. We have a couple of different special guests in the audience in attendance and effect, and we also see a lot of people online. I will be monitoring, but without any further to do, I'm going to introduce the great Yusef Shakur, author, my homie, and more so right now he is on his way to being Dr. Bunchy. So this is going to be Dr. Bunchy pretty soon. So I assume like next year when we do this address and we carry on, it's going to be the doctorate of this. So Yusef, how you feeling?
Feeling good, brother. And what up, though?
What up, though? What up, though? All right. So we have a lot of people already online commenting and everything. Give a short introduction and then we'll get into some of these topics.
My name is Yusef Bunchy Shakur, son of Ava Joe, native of Black Detroit, representative of the Black liberation struggle, seeking self-determination, independence by any means necessary.
By any means necessary. That is very strong. And those are words of, Malcolm El Hajj, Malik El Shabazz. But we may know him around here as Detroit Red at one point in time, how people knew him, Boston knew him, but heck of an organizer. And we were speaking of him and organizing. And we're going to open up this forum and we're talking about 7 different points. And you frame this discussion haves and have-nots.
Right.
And before we even begin from that lens, why haves and have-nots? I remember I said we're going to do this again as I want to build the tradition. I'm decade thinking now. Whatever I do, I want to put a seed in the ground where we can at least do it for 10 years and then assess how we grow. Do we continue? Is something else needed? How do we pivot? But right now in that growing, haves and have-nots, and we're focusing on that. Why? Why is that something that you wanted to focus on for this year's address?
I think it's a long overdue conversation in Detroit, and anytime we talk about the state of Detroit, so when you say the state, the Detroit, and you put those two words together, we're talking about something that's very huge, humongous that's going on, and the state is centered around these two social classes of have and have-nots that has existed for quite some time, and they've been shaped socially, politically, and economically by the dynamics of white hegemony. Some folks would say white supremacy. I use the word hegemony in replace of supremacy. I think it fits better, and it's in our quest for democracy, in our quest for freedom and equity, and all those other great terms that we use. We tend to underestimate the dynamics of a social class. Like the economic structure of America is capitalism. By default, it creates what some people call caste systems, a class structure. And when you go deeper within that, as on the backs of those of our ancestors and our elders who worked in those factories, right? And what do you say? Detroit created the modern, what we call the black middle class. H. Rap Brown once said, "The middle class is a myth." And when you understand that by examining and what I interpret what he meant by a myth, no matter how much money that we acquire in America, and those of us live in Detroit, you always remind that you're black. You always reminded that you're a nigga. You always remind that you're a Negro in some form and some fashion. And as most of us who begin to move up the social ladder, and also in wake of starting in the late 70s going to the 80s, the dynamics change dramatically in terms of the introduction of crack cocaine, the escalation of what many people call gangs, street organization, drug organizations. The deterioration of Black Detroit was in the mix of those dynamics, right? And we are a complicated people, And we're complicated because of our oppression. Our oppression has created a lot of complication. And if we just started the benchmark of the 80s going to the 90s, it created, our oppression created a lot of trauma. It created a lot of pain that many of us have lost ourselves in because we don't want to be associated with it. You know, when you think about whether you grew up on Linwood, you grew up on Dexter, you grew up on Mac and Bewick, um, you know, whatever those streets are, 6 Mile, 7 Mile, and it brings some joy, but it brings a lot of pain. And the people, we're running from that pain. And but also within there, you know, our schools began to deteriorate. The phenomenon of black single mothers became the norm, you know, and ushered in through the 90s. You know, there was some of us who still, as yourself, experienced a function in a two family household, right? And the pressure of these competing dynamics, it created this division within the black community. And I saw it firsthand in my family. You know, again, most of my uncles. So a lot of people don't know my mother was the youngest of 8 children, 7 brothers. Her older sister was old enough to be her mother. And majority of all my uncles, one was a police officer. One worked in the bar, but he had skilled trades during that time period. But the rest worked in factories. And I never really understood openly that that side of my family lived a middle class life. It wasn't until when my grandmother passed, and I was allowed to come home from the training school to attend her funeral. My caseworker came with me, and my caseworker began to talk to my aunts and my uncles, and they began to describe this community, this neighborhood that we lived in, and saying it's not conducive for a boy to live over there. And that may be true, but it didn't talk about the other dynamics. And the other dynamics was, again, my mother raising me. We had a relationship to this community in this neighborhood, good, bad, or indifferent. And so they decided, my auntie, my uncles, and my caseworker, that I would go and be living in a independent living. When I come home, I would live with my auntie, and then via my auntie, I could see my mother. I'm like, man, hell no, this is not how this is going to work. You know, all I know is my mother. All I know is my grandfather. I know is my neighborhood. And because of those dynamics, it created, like, it brought into fruition this division. And the division began to take place because what we call now the hood was no longer a neighborhood. And we're honest with ourselves, hood, it represents a certain connotation socially, politically, economically. At one point, it meant black. You know, I'm from the hood. I'm tough. I'm blah blah blah. But it evolved. It evolved or mutated into something else. And most of us say, we'll say the hood, and then when we say the hood, we know what we talking about. We ain't talking about just a regular place that you just go pull up on, you just chill. No, it's a place that if you don't know the right people over there, anything may happen. But how did the hood become the hood? And this goes back to integration. And there's many of our scholars, many of our folks who have talked about it, and I don't think we've done enough. Integration has been the worst thing for us. Not the ability to try to move upward and change our dynamics, but the less that we got away from each other, the more we became like them. What I mean by become like them. To pursue a better opportunity for yourself is not white. It's not, but because of the society we live in and the dynamics, we use those type of language. Oh, you going to University of Michigan? Or you trying to be like them white people? Or you going to Southfield? You trying to be like them? No, I or we are trying to achieve what any human being with a better quality of life. But it's in the mix of the dynamics of white hegemony. White hegemony has set the table. It's set the structure, and because in our mind, what we perceive success is tied to whiteness. And until we able to break from that and redefine what it looks like from our community, what our from us, so this is a contribute to the breakdown, the infrastructure of Black communities. Because as Malcolm taught us, we control nothing in our community. So as a result of not controlling anything, and as the floodgates begin to open up through the drugs and the gangs and us leaving out. So now, and everything I said, we fast forward. Your neighborhood is under attack. My neighborhood is under attack. And what her white hegemony does is they go out and they get individuals who look like us, who come from Detroit, who no longer live in Detroit, to determine what's good for your community, what's good for my community, and then also what happens? It put us against each other. Because first thing I'm gonna say is, I got Quasi at the table, I got a Yusef at the table, but what we're not questioning is the education of a Yusef, the interest of a Quasi. The interest level is different, as if the poor people, the haves of it or the have-nots have no ability to determine or define what their community should look like. So I've always said, like, people are not opposed to new development. What we're opposed to is new development being imposed on us. I repeat, we're not opposed to new development. We're opposed to it being imposed on us, as if we have not been sitting in our communities, sitting there on our couches and having conversation about, hey, that liquor store up there need to be cleaned up. That gas station around the corner, we need to do blah 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 with it. Or the park, like, we don't, like, as if Black folks in poor environments don't have these conversations. We absolutely do have these conversations. But what's missing in this equation is we don't have the resources, or nor do we have the representation to manifest the type of desire, to meet the desires that we have. So they're taking advantage, our Black vulnerability. And our Black, instead of being our strength, it becomes our weakness, because they use other individuals. So this is part of what creates what I identify as the have and have nots. We'll get deeper into it.
All right, so getting deeper into it, and that's definitely a great introduction of why haves and have nots. I'm very interested in, where things will lie for 2023.
Right.
But now, in the present day of now, we open up talking about family and relationships. Something big happened for you, and it's happened for me, in the passing of your mother.
Right.
Many of our traditions and cultures throughout our communities are very matriarchal. I grew up with my father, but still, I believe my mother and my grandmother, her mother, played such a heavy role in how decisions would be made in our family, in the structure of family.
Right.
So this is very key. So when we talk about family, and let's start there, then we can get into relationships, and relationships just beyond the usual, I guess, romantic or intimate relationships, but even friendships. As one of the big things I'm beginning to have discussions about is just discourse. How do we have disagreement? How do we move forward? But let's start with family.
Mm-hmm.
The role of family, haves and have-nots. You touched on it a little bit with just speaking about your own family.
Right.
And more so, we're talking about just the role of how decisions are made in family, because that was a tough decision for your mother to make, to say, no, he's my son, and he's going to stay here with me in my home, because this is the best place for my son, even though everything on paper looks as if it's better to be in another community.
Right. Your question helps us understand every answer to the problem that we have. It comes out of our own lived experience. I repeat, every problem that we have, and we're looking for a solution, it comes out of our own lived experience. My great grandmother was born in Georgia, moved over to Alabama, met her first husband. They had children, ended up getting divorced. She went back to Georgia. She met her next husband. He kind of went through the same thing, had kids. And I bring that to say, because when they migrated up north, my family, first they started in Southwest Detroit, and then ultimately at some point they bought a 4-family flat right there on Elmhurst, down the street from Tappan Middle School. And my family existed in this household. My auntie, again, who was old enough to be my mother, her and her husband ended up buying a house on Indiana down the street from Marygrove, right? And so I think when most people, when they come to the Mama Akua Community House, if you know anything about your history, houses have played an instrumental role in the liberation and the foundation and the structure of Black families. Because of, again, to you talking about the tight knitness of it. We joke about Mexican people, man, they got 20 of them in one house. That was Black folks. That was Black folks at one time. We had 20, 30, whatever we had to do to be conducive to us as a community, as a family. We figured that out, because of the social conditions demanded of us to behave and function in that type of way. No, so that social phenomenon, it made us operate in a design manner for the better interests of our people. And then we began to move out and start extending our family. So in my household, houses has always been an instrumental in developing who I am. Because the house on Elmhurst, right around the corner from there, is my grandfather's house on my father's side, who he still owns that same house, still has the same phone number from 50 years ago, right? I mean, these are our small traditions that we've got away from that were our cornerstones. The house on my auntie lived on Indiana, that house. The house down the street on Ferry Park with my grandfather on, right? Though those are, when I think about security as a boy, I always felt secure in those households. And those households represented my family, even though whatever adults was going through, they hid them and they worked on. But if you look at that timeline though, coming out of the 70s, as we began to so-called do better, it ultimately deteriorated of us to do worse in terms of our infrastructure of our relationships to each other. Because what we call it now? We chasing the bad. We called it something else back then, and the bad was functioning more as individuals. And that's what happens in a capitalist society, whether you believe in capitalism or not. It tells you that you have to go out and do what you have to do as an individual. And the more we function like that, the more, because at our best as a people in Detroit is when we work together.
So I just naturally have to reframe this question and just pull more as we look into like the analysis of what the challenge is, and then an analysis of what a solution could be. What I'm pulling, what you're saying, is more so as people step into this idea of individualism, and really, when we think of America, it's rugged individualism. Right. They usually put that adjective in front, right, tying it to success. So if I pull this correctly from family, what you're saying is, as we embrace the ideologies of individualism, more so as we have more, we become more of the individual.
Correct.
When we have not, quote unquote, we're thinking more familial. We're thinking more in the group. So I'm asking this question, is this more so the analysis of that? And if that is the analysis, what can become that solution in that connection, especially when we think of that bond for family?
So the terms have and have nots are just placeholders.
Yes.
And when you go deeper inside of our communities and our households, as I just broke down, and you examine your own self, even though that your Uncle Billy may be driving a Cadillac, Auntie Susie doing whatever, right? There was no open distinction, because again, when you think about segregation, where all Black people live, we live together, we function together. When we talk about Black Wall Street, Black Bottom here, right? Our talent was concentrated in one area. So we had no choice but to utilize it for the betterment for ourselves. Mm-hmm. The infrastructure of that broke down when we thought that we can go outside and do other things, and that's not a bad thing per se, because you're trying to function the way you want to function in today's society. But what we fail to understand is that society created laws and a playbook that wasn't designed for our betterment. Mm-hmm. It worked against us. And so even though we was breaking down barriers of being the first Black family to move on this block, or the first Black family to go to this school, whatever that was, and those were monumental things, at what cost though? Then we was able to achieve that success, but then the backdrop, we're losing our connection to each other, because again, now this is what success is looking like. Because again, like who don't want to live in a nice neighborhood? Who don't want to have a nice car? Who don't? I mean, like, man, people again because we say hood. 40 years ago, the hood word was ghetto. Like who didn't want to live in the ghetto, right? But then most of us who lived in the ghetto didn't know we lived in the ghetto. Like most of us was poor, didn't know we was poor, because our families, our mothers, and our fathers did a damn good job to shield us from those things. I began to know what poverty and poor was like when Michael Jordan gym shoes came out, because we couldn't afford them motherfuckers. I began to know what poverty and being poor was like when the Levi's, the blue jeans in the 80s, when again, if you got you a Michael Jordan, some Jordans, you wanted some Levi's to go along with them, or if you wanted to step up, you go to Sibley's and get you some Bally's, you go get you some Calvin Klein's, a leather belt, and a silk shirt. We couldn't afford those things. So if you couldn't afford those things, crack cocaine was an opportunity how to afford those things, because it created, as the factories left, it created new economic opportunities on what I call the economic embargo. I repeat, I think there was an economic embargo that was placed on Detroit through the emergence of Coleman Young becomes the first black mayor in the city of Detroit, surrounded by white suburbs. I mean, can you imagine Coleman Young going to a Democratic Party in the 70s and 80s as probably the only black mayor besides the brother in the Highland Park during that time period, in this so-called program? Like we get caught up in terminologies again, like see, even have and have nots, like we still black. Like Malcolm taught us, I can be a Muslim, you can be a Christian, but soon as you walk outside and we get shot, they didn't shoot you because you was a Christian. They didn't shoot you because you was a Muslim. They shot you because you was black. And we get caught up on you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. The democracy that they're fighting for is white hegemony. They're fighting for a different type of democracy than what we're fighting, but because we're playing or going by their playbook, and this ties us all back into, so the importance of having a conversation to have and have nots is now in the present day where you live at, where I live at, and a lot of folks live in the city of Detroit. You're talking about communities neighborhoods that's under siege. Mm-hmm. And how do you address that under siege? We send the police in, we send the police in, we send the police in.
So naturally, the second half of this, before I open the floor for guests here, if they would like to have a question or comment, and more so questions now, comment later. Relationship then. Let's get to the solutions, because we spoke on family and the challenges we're facing. How do we build relationship? And that could be, as I say, friendship. It also is intimate relationships. How do we build upon those relationships when we already may have a fractured family ideology of what we see as success? Because a lot of things that you're putting out is, nice car, nice house. That's all I believe. A lot of programming and what we believe and what we perceive is that. How do we combine in relationship for growth, for understood values, to work together, to move forward in understanding alone?
Well, we have to stop allowing people outside our community to determine our relationships, to determine what success is and how we function in the success hierarchy. And by default, we all do that. And until we have serious conversations, because again, we all wrestle with being black. Whether you're a black man, a black woman, a black girl, a black gay person, because we all find ourselves surrounded or suffocating in whiteness, and at some level. And until we able to break that, and breaking that is, creating they say an even playing field. And what is an even playing field? Because a lot of times, I know for me personally, the spaces I go in, it's like there's only enough room for maybe 2 Negroes at the table. Maybe 2.5, possibly.
A half Negro.
And
a lot of halves out here.
And a lot of us don't even realize, like, we begin to perform in a certain way in this space. Because I know when I've been home 21 years. Some of us know, like, I've been to prison, whoopity whoop, right? And you get oh, you so wonderful, brother. You're so great, and you're so, like, I remember one person told me, like, I didn't know you was that intelligent, or I didn't know you was that smart. And I'm like, man, what smart looks like and shit, right? And I bring that because we all hear that. We all hear in some form, some fashion, this exceptionalism. And even now that we taking that exceptionalism, we're using the term black excellence. And I'm still trying to, like, what is black excellence? Does black excellence supersede black liberation now? Or is that the new code word? And I'm not taking a shot at it per se, but we're trying to create comfortability to exist while we still being oppressed. Why not acknowledging and recognizing that we're oppressed? And sit with that for a minute. The problem is not being oppressed. The problem is what we're going to do about being oppressed. So I'm in school. just was reading this theory called feminist standpoint theory, and I really rock with it because in it talks about the position and the situation of the person where you're located, its strength. The strength of it has the ability to analyze your situation and provide you with the data and the analysis for your liberation. There's privilege in your position. And I read like, damn, that's powerful, that's deep. And I'm very careful of using white social theories to explain black phenomena, using white social theories to explaining black phenomena. But I think that one there relates because you go deeper. Feminist standpoint theory grows out of Marxism and what Marx should stand for. I mean, and it's all complicated, but I bring that up to say because of when we talk about solutions, again, even that's a trick word because people, I think it was Elgin Cleaver said, either you're part of the problem or you're part of the solution, right? And so with black folks, when we come to the table and we start talking, like, why are you complaining? I'm not complaining, motherfucker. I just haven't had a chance to talk. It sounds like I'm complaining. Let me speak my piece. Then you may hear the solution. And again, because of where we're trying to get to, we're trying to get there so fast. And we're not trying to bring everybody on board. So for me, and prior to my mother passing, I've always determined and measured how I engage struggle through looking at the world through her lens, through her eyes. These books I read these books. My mama ain't read these books. If I gave it to her, she'd be like, nigga, I ain't reading these books. You know, it was going to, and that's just the authentic talk, right, that we would have. However, she was an everyday struggler in her own way. She fed folks. She opened her room up, her house to house people, et cetera, without a grant. And these are things that we have to, like, people ask the question, could Marcus Garvey be and the UNIA be successful in these times of organizing? And that's a deep question because you think about it in the 20s and the 30s, his organization himself, it was very, very successful. Why they was very successful? Black folks they knew they was oppressed.
I definitely think that that's a great segue into what the next topic is. Before we segue into that, as you talked about learning, the floor is open. I don't know if anybody here. We have the space. We got a camera. Some cool people that already have a lot of influence, just in reference to that. But we may just give them a little bit more time. And the next topic that we're getting into is we're talking about education and youth. You talked about giving your mom the book, and then you also talked about white theory. I'm one to believe, as I talk a whole lot to my dad, it's like we're behind enemy lines here anyway. Right. So being behind enemy lines, almost everything is white theory. We have to decode so much of how we interpret anything, any information, strengthening critical thinking skills, as we were having that good discussion yesterday with Joe Black. When we think of education, and I usually like to use the term knowledge, but just broadly, because I think education is more of a system, but that's another one of the media words, but it's a term, it's something people can latch on to. Youth, knowledge, education, where do things stand when we think of haves, have-nots? Because usually those lines are drawn, and you kind of already went into housing. But this is very key because when quote-unquote redlining stopped, one of the few things that any real estate agent can definitely say nowadays is it's a good school. Right. We know good school is a subtle way of saying it's a lot of white students at this school. Right. So basically a school becomes bad when a lot of black students end up at that school, not because black students are bad, because the school ends up under-resourced. Right. When the school ends up under-resourced, then you end up with a quote-unquote bad school. And then that goal post keeps shifting as time goes on. And that's why education plays such a key role, because that usually is the catalyst for people saying, I want to live in a good neighborhood for my kids to go to school. Right. You know, so I really want you to frame this in haves and have-nots when we think of education and youth and what impacts and the differences in that. And as we know, they're definitely labels, but we're going to walk in this state of the label.
So Fred Hampton had always referenced a quote that Huey P. Newton said, which people learn through participation and observation. people learn through participation and observation. And I think it was Maya Angelou also said, people may not remember what you say, but how you make them feel. So I talked about my mother. If I gave her on this book, she'd be like, man, I ain't reading one of those books, right? And if we just leave it there, we can interpret it a certain way. I'm an extension of my mother. And part of being an extension of my mother is I read these books. And how do we figure out where she's at and where I'm at? And I think we don't do enough of that. We don't do enough of the internal work of creating operations of how to take where people at and what, because again, like my mother was one of the smartest, if not the smartest person I know. But if I use the educational system of America, she won't measure on that. Before my mother passed, she ran multiple business. She never went to U of M. Business was a School of Ross. She didn't have LLCs and any of those things. But she figured it out, right? And this is what, again, when you talk about like Dr. Carl Taylor talks about the Black underworld. Black folks have always had to figure it out because there was different rules. I mean, again, many of us, if we investigate, a lot of our great grandparents, whatnot, they couldn't read or write. Mm-hmm. They couldn't read or write, but that wasn't an indictment on them. That was an indictment on who? The society that prevented them from reading and write. But despite them couldn't read and write, they still was able to be successful. Was it success based upon what the society told, or success based upon what they was able to take? With what we say is make $1 out of 15 cents, or take those lemons and make lemonade with it, right? But what was powerful in that, and what we don't measure, even though my mother didn't want to read these books, and all she had was a high school education. I'm now about to get my PhD, not because anything is white society, but because this is what I'm saying, the connection. I'm standing on my mother's shoulders. It is out of the aspirations of my mother, out of my grandfather, my grandmother, that I'm able to achieve, right? But also what they drilled in me, okay, you can go get that education, but for what purpose? So when I went to University of Michigan School of Social Work, and they would ask us the question, why are you here to get a social work degree? And I tell them, I'm not here to be a social worker. I'm here to get to learn and build off the resources and try to get those resources to my community. So education, if you know about Black folks, we've got the education out of our own lived experience. And this is what makes these books, for those who are capable and should want to read, is within these books. I'm talking about not just any books, like these books that's written about us. And so, like, the one book I have up here is In Love and Struggle, which is a autobiography of Jimmy and Grace Lee Boggs. So we keep talking about the have and have-nots, like put in a historical context, right? Aretha Franklin's father was trying to build here in the North the civil rights movement, of a version up here in the North. He was, many of us know, he was making his institution very available to community, local, grassroots folks, or who at that time would be considered militant. Jimmy and Grace Lee Boggs, at the time, the Henry brothers, Mario Obadeli and his brother, Reverend Clee, even though he had his own institution, they would utilize his institution. And as a result of him trying to duplicate the civil rights up in the North, which is non-militant, more get along, go along type of thing, right? And I'm describing what it was. A conflict emerged, a contradiction emerged. Most of us don't know. If you read this book, this way, what Jimmy, or the author, helps us understand what Jimmy talks about. The conference that happened in November 1963, right around the corner in the King Solomon Church, the Grassroots Leadership Conference, was born out of that have and have-nots, because Aretha Franklin's father didn't want to be associated with the militant. Claudia Jones teaches us through her writings not only about Black women, but Black people. Again, like, you think about that grandfather, that great uncle, that great grandmother, like, oh, they so mean, they militant. But why was they militant? Because of the pressure that was on their back. So their education was born out of their experience, which provided them a way to how to deal with that. Mm-hmm. And that how they deal with it, wanted to create their own opportunities out of their own lived experience. The thing is, one, what we've got away from, of searching for freedom that was on our terms, not on someone else's term. And so that was the type of education that was shaping Black folks. And so when we pass forward, we can't not negate counterintelligence program. But unfortunately, when we talk about counterintelligence program, we only talk about in this small window, because it was named in the 60s, going through the 60s and the 70s, but it always had existed. It always exists in the world. If you're fighting against something, there's always a counterintelligence program trying to undermine them, because those who in power will never relinquish it without a fight. So again, going back to education, many of us don't know who we are because we live in a society that has written us into their history books. They have written us into their history books. And so they define Nat Turner as what? A villain. But if Nat Turner was white, he wouldn't be a villain. He would be a hero. He would be a hero, right? But because how we've internalized anti-Blackness, we don't see Nat Turner in that same, like we had that debate when we talk about education. Are we fighting for violence or nonviolence or violence? And I forget who said, like, violence and nonviolence is a strategy. It's not a way of life.
And I definitely want to add this, as you know, I love Detroit's Black history.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have the In Love and Struggle. I haven't finished everything in it and definitely getting to that point. But I want to give a little bit bigger of a framework for it, Reverend C.L. Franklin and what he represented. And also like Reverend Shuttlesworth down in Cincinnati and everything. I mean, both were pillars in funding the Montgomery bus boycott. Mm-hmm. The money that C.L. Franklin was raising, because he was one of the few reverends that stood beside and stood behind Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. during this time of the Montgomery bus boycott. And it fed everything. I don't know if people kind of understand that the Montgomery bus boycott toppled the economy of Alabama and a lot of the South, to the point where the federal government was asked to step in. And that's what really ushered in a lot of the changes, as you say, towards quote unquote integration. But C.L. Franklin also, in this, the stance of, I could definitely see in the militancy, I mean, his role in the way that the Ku Klux Klan was running him out of Tennessee. Mm-hmm. He had a different understanding for the amount of direct violence, right, and which kind of gave him more of an open ear to different strategies when evaluating fighting the machine of this oppressive, violent racism that they were facing. Right. So like in this whole onboarding of, you know, me, I'm big in context. And then even with that, in understanding that, he still definitely he saw a lot of energy in people, like when we think of like the Kenny Snodgrass, the Obadeli brothers, Gaeti, and then he looks at definitely some of the things that were happening with the start of what ended up becoming the Shrine of the Black Madonna. Mm-hmm. He saw Detroit as a stronghold and a place where it's like, okay, I can get here because I can maybe find more consciousness. And then he saw New Bethel as a post from the history. In my history, I'm quoting from Pastor Smith, Dan Aldrich, Mama Watson, and some people that had relationships with the Franklin family. So I think that it's some context, but in that same context, I definitely see that, like, at some times it's like we need to move, and this understanding, and that's really when we get to how some decisions are made. Because even when we think of the incident of the Republic of New Africa happening in New Bethel Church, right, New Bethel Baptist Church, right, and then him still standing throughout that, but really that kind of being the relationship with him then at that time, you know, Gaeti Obadeli, that, you know, Milton Henry, the great attorney that represented so many, that was a mentor to Chokwe Lumumba, who was one of my mentors too, and so many others. Just navigating these relationships kind of goes back into understanding in education and understanding in context, how things swap and interchange, as if, you know, that need for militancy, that need for violent acts being a strategy, and nonviolent acts being a strategy, and politics being a strategy, and media being a strategy, and so many other strategies of just even keeping like family and feeding people, because that's really what a lot of this organizing from a lot of the churches up south in the north, helping the civil rights movement in the South. And even when we think about the way that that was framed, when we think of the ministers of defense and so many others that really were, some shotgun toting black folks that wasn't taking it. But the way that media frames the story of Martin Luther King is that, like, hey, these dogs are going to chase us, some hoses are going to come out and just, get beat up so white people feel bad for us. It was a lot more in that story, but history looks at it differently. Sort of like the story of the relationship between the churches of King Solomon, New Bethel, and the Shrine of Black Madonna. I just wanted to say.
No, all that's important, man. The Institute for Black World developed a question. Is it in the interest of Black people? I repeat. The Institute of Black World, they developed a question that we all have to ask ourselves, is it in the interest of Black people, right? And so that nuance in the context that you're providing also helps us to look at the ideology. There's an ideology, right, behind these decisions. And W. Du Bois said it best. Black folks in America suffers from, these two warring ideas. Being Black and being American, they can't coexist with each other because black bodies have always suffered as a result of being American, right? And so when we're talking about whether it's violent or non-violent, I'm talking about more that's a way. That's not a way of life. That is a strategy, and because of the interest, again, is it in the interest of Black people? So like if we go back and we look at King and that group, they was opposed to the Freedom Riders. Why was they opposed to the Freedom Riders? Because he was in negotiation with Lyndon Johnson and whatnot, because he thought their tactics was necessary, right? But not look at those things in a bubble, and it fits within the framework of Detroit in this conversation of have and have nots. So the militancy is we all have it. Like you step on anybody's shoe in this room, man, you gonna get your ass off my damn shoe. This is nothing because of how white society, white hegemony has defined it as this negative connotation. We're all militant, which is meaning you take an extreme approach to try to solve, again, your word, a solution. So being militant is born out of trying to find a solution to a fucked up situation. Your foot is on my back. I need to get this motherfucker off my back by any means necessary. But so again, when you like when Kwame Ture and SNCC shouts out Black Power, it becomes a conversational piece. Oh, white hegemony was afraid, but it wasn't a conversational piece around white power. It was okay. But who's setting the table? Who's determining the conversational piece? Because anytime we operate and function to try to change our conditions, it's opposition to something, right? But then for what end, what goal? Fast forward, we talk about the pastors. I'm going to say Yusef Bunchy Shakur, most of the pastors in Detroit are full of shit. Most of them, why they're most full of shit? Because their interest level is bought into the system. When if we go and read Jesus was what? Jesus was with the people. He ate with the people, he slept with the people. How many pastors are doing that, right? And we can come up with a great reason from a biblical standpoint of why they shouldn't. But it's still logically, it doesn't make goddamn sense if you're saying poor people. But this is where we have to challenge ourselves. Poverty exists because of capitalism, because of the economic structure that we live in. This what creates the have-nots in this city. And we see so many of our so-called Black leaders, at one point, they were standing on this side, then 10 years later, they standing over here. And then the everyday folks, they like, what the fuck?
And that brings to definitely the bookend question of this, young people, because young people observe that. When I go through and I look at certain pictures and hear certain stories, I'm shocked and surprised of some of the, onboarding of some of these public figures that I feel like do not align themselves with Black empowerment in the Black community that I identify with. How do young people make sense of this? What's the differentiating factor to bring that unity together for that idea of have and have not? And when you do wake up, like you say, with that feeling like, damn, I can't have no J's.
Right.
How does that young person?
But it's not even just young people, man. I mean, when you think again, we're African people, we're holistic. We're a holistic people, not only as young, but our elders, our parents. We're all struggling with those things, and we have to create a mentality in our community that's saying every life is valuable. And then, so if every life is valuable, young people become even more valuable because, as the saying goes, they will inherit they will inherit the earth or the world that we're going to leave them. And but as a result, young people seeing a lot of fuck shit. So if they saying fuck shit, why you didn't think they'd be on some fuck shit? I remember when what was it? Ken Cocker Jr. and what's Kanye's wife name?
Monica Conyers.
Yeah, Monica. When Monica and Kanye and they was arguing at the city council, she called him Trek or some shit.
I think it's one of the most it's one of the most memorable moments that we know of that council.
No, and I bring that as an illustrated point, right? If this is the type of behavior that we see from our so-called leadership, then why wouldn't we expect that nothing less than the same thing from young folks, right? But also what we're not looking at is there's even in young people, there's different degrees. The young people like you and I grow is different than the young people that's growing up on 7 Mile. Mm-hmm. I know the poverty is shaping folks differently, but also again, poverty has the ability to shape you to be able to want to address that situation. Young people have always been an instrument, has been at the forefront of changing the dynamics. No, Ella Baker, if it was left up to King and his group, SNCC would have been up under them. SNCC would have been up under their wing. Ella Baker said, no, be yourself, create your own, develop your own voice. It didn't mean that you don't need elders to help guide you, but you need to force, because she was organized. She saw it. She never really publicly criticized King, though. But if you read between the lines, there was some indirect things that she said in terms of like leadership is not about if our leadership is dependent on one person, we won't see freedom.
And I do think that, as I say, that discourse and challenging one another, as we always do. I mean, you all kind of just saw the back and forth me and Yusef usually have. Like, you all should witness some of our phone calls sometimes. And one of the things key on my heart nowadays, more and more, is, and you spoke on it, I have health and aging together.
Okay.
You know, and it's unique in the framework, and we're going to flip it. I want you to speak to aging first, because one of the things that bothers me, at least a little bit, what I interpret, and I'm sensitive to this because of my background and my family, is I believe that a lot of, in some of this new progressive thought, comes this ideology as if elders and the old way of thinking is backwards, as if we need to dismiss the wisdom in the knowledge of, I always say, my OGs or of our elders. Right. It bothers me. You know what I'm saying? I was soaking up so much game from Mama and Neb and Baba Malik the other day, and Marion Kramer. It's just good for me to be in that space. I like being in that space, but that has a lot to do with my relationship as a child with my grandmother. Right. What does aging look like in this haves, have-nots, especially, you know, usually it's people in our age range that are taking on the responsibility of caretaking for our elders, because the elder becomes somewhat like the child at times, and that haves and have-nots divide can look very big. And usually that's when the have-nots, the person with a little bit more time on their hands in the family, steps up and kind of can take a paramount role by playing a role in caretaking for the person that the family cherishes. So I want you to frame that up, and then we're gonna get into health. And I really want you to talk about what's happening with Henry Ford down the street when we get into that.
As I mentioned earlier, from an African way of thinking, we are holistic people. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about aging, we have to put it in that framework of in a European lifestyle versus an African lifestyle. And I think we have moved towards engaging aging from a European lifestyle. Like so they don't have the same kinship to their elders or within their community the same the way you do. Like you just said, the fondness and memory of you and your grandmother. Same thing, me and my grandfather. I mean, I think any of us could think about that. Like So when I grew up, my grandfather lived, my great uncle lived down the street, like or downstairs. Like that kinship helped shape and form. Like it rarely did you hear about going to put Grandma Susie in a damn in a home or something. Like she lived with us. Like that was abnormal. Right. And it may be a few exceptions here and there, right? But again, when we and that's so important to look at these different lived experiences and how they shape us. And it doesn't make them bad or good or make us better. No, they're just two different worldviews.
Cultural context.
Yeah, absolutely. It's two different worldviews. And it's important to understand that, and because within that framework, it helps us understand why folks are behaving that they are, right? And so I'm gonna illustrate a point. When New Era Detroit, when it came on the scene as an organization, its attitude was we ain't nobody taught us nothing. And it may be some truth in that, but as you just explained, I'm gonna go sit down with Mama Ned. I'm gonna go sit down with Marion Kramer. I'm gonna go sit down with General Baker. I'm gonna go sit down with Earl Wheeler out of Highland Park.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go sit down with Ron Scott. But what we're not opening up, there's a level of pain that that has our hearts and our minds hemorrhaging, that we're trying to remove, but we're moving so fast that it's putting us in a position to fighting against each other. Because again, that's not the African way to say I'm not going to listen to my elders.
Yeah.
But we have to make a distinction because there's a elder in our community. I call it old folk, right? Because of how he uses his position and his knowledge, right? And I've learned that, like when I was in prison, there was the old guys that was very manipulative, and then there was the elders that just here, young boy or young folk, man, I'm gonna give you this. What you do with it, and we have to make that distinction, but also we have to understand there's a need. So for like I'm saying I'm similar like you. My life was formed and shaped by my grandfather and my grandmother. So I'm gonna always pay homage to my elders, even though that we may disagree. But even in our disagreement, I'm gonna figure out how to disagree respectively, because I can, again, going back to my mama, if we get back to my mama that I disrespected the elder, she gonna smack the shit out of me, whether if I was right or wrong, because that's what some you just didn't do. I mean, these are some of the fundamental things that we've gotten away from within our household when you look at how we're performing. So again, this goes back to within the have and have nots. When we look in the hood, those of our elders who are left to survive in these type of conditions, and the young folks who are not growing up, they have no relationship to landmark. Like we had the Crockers, was the last block store in our community. I mean, somebody broke in their house, and somebody told me, like, man, somebody broke in the Crockers' house. And I was doing something else, and I drove through the neighborhood trying to find a fucking TV, and I saw a guy. They had a TV, and I thought it was them. Got out, walked up on them, man, like, I'm ready to go to war. Yeah, because of what the Crockers meant to our community. But not everybody has that same relationship or that same understanding that you just said, the nuance and the context, but also what pain is turning us into is predators. Pain is turning us into savages. Pain is also turning us into thinking that we're better than folks, so we're going to move away from the community.
And it's so unique that you speak to that, as like when I think of the aging process, and as you talk about just how things have changed, because to feel as though our aging elder is not safe in our own community, where we have to go outside our community, and we already have an understanding which goes straight into the transition of when we think of healthcare. I had a post about the story of my birth. Hutzel Hospital, 1982, 40 years ago. My mom gave birth to me on the floor of the emergency center because the nurse at the time did not really believe my mom was really in labor and about to have me. So she, through her and God, I was born, no anesthesia, no spinal, no nothing, and we're trusting our elders in these spaces where they have proven to turn their back on Black people. And when we talk about turning their back on Black people, you talk about the cancer center that's being built and developed. Henry Ford is always had a strained relationship with Detroit's Black community, but especially over here. Can you frame that up for us?
Before we go there, I think it's important to just put the whole conversation in context in relationship to Detroit.
Yeah.
Dr. Carl S. Taylor, he identified like urban cities as what he called the third city, and he said he was born in the third city, and when you say anybody's born in the third city, he said I was born in segregation, but also understanding third city mean I'm a third, not a second class citizen, but I'm a third class citizen, right?
Mm.
So this is deep when we evaluate those dynamics, right? And we've learned how to coexist in our Black enclaves of building better communities, better families, while still having oppression on our backs, on our necks. We figured out how to maneuver and whatnot, right? So when we fast forward, the third city, in my opinion, because the third city is nothing but a colony, and then within the colony, I've been talking about the hood, you have now a colony inside the colony, which is the third hoods, and the third hoods are these drug infested neighborhoods who've deteriorated at its condition, but within both of these dynamics, none of us, we control the infrastructure economically, politically, and socially. So fast forward to a Henry Ford Hospital or any other type of institution. And then let me just pivot real quick. Within the wake of this nonprofit industrial complex, right? Because most of the Black communities are dependent on nonprofits in some form or some fashion. Why or how? Because all their grants is what? To serve low income, undeserving, blah blah blah, whatever the new language is. And this is part of the problem too, because all the new language is what? It's setting the table of how we're designing or going to function in our community. And if we're not using that language, we don't get respected. Or going back to the other conversation, oh shit, there go Yusef, that militant motherfucker. He gonna upset the and the sad thing, it's not even coming from white folks per se. It's coming from us. It comes from us, and it's not a problem per se if we have a difference. Why we can't go in the back room and talk about these things? Because again, if we look historically at this time, Malcolm and Martin was beginning to work it out. They was beginning to figure out how could they work together, even though they had different point of views. W. Du Bois years later said, "What man? I was more in alignment with Marcus Garvey. I was more in alignment with Booker T. Washington." But what happened? He had to continue to grow. He had to continue to expand his mind. But then, like, I'm very cautious on using the word sellout because it's so overused. Is it applicable? Absolutely. However, it's such a ace in the hole that we sell out and like no context, no nothing to it, and we have to be careful because we're beating each other up, and it's. Not saying we shouldn't be critical of each other. We absolutely, but we have to have patience with each other too. And having that patience is understanding, like going back to like Henry Ford Hospital and other institutions that's trying to determine how our communities should function. But what's missing in that conversation is the de-investment that has taken place where, again, this neighborhood, your neighborhood, all the neighborhoods that we grew up in, for the most part, they was thriving Black communities. They was thriving Black communities, Lauren. So what happened? Why they are no longer thriving Black communities? Where did it go? Like the intelligence is still there, the spirit is still there, but we're so fractured. Mm-hmm. We're a fractured community, and our fraction is I'm going for self. I'm just trying to take care of me. You try to take care of you. We're no longer functioning as a community. So this again, our vulnerability is at an all-time high. And so now Henry Ford Hospital began because of how democracy functions and their position as an institution that so as a so-called anchor, they can come in, they can say, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And he goes, and because it's really not, it's on Henry Ford, but then again, when you look at who's voting, when they go down to the city council, which is in Detroit, a predominantly Black city council. I repeat, a predominantly Black city council who's voting on a lot of the shit that they're bringing down here. The same thing on the east side when that one company wanted to buy all the land and put some fake up, put some fake ass trees up, right? Who voted on that? Black city council. But again, it goes back to what? Was it in the interest of black people? Everybody can function in the interest of that group, but when it comes to black people, that's a problem.
That's deep.
I mean, same thing when the conversation in Detroit was talking about building what? Black Harbor Town. It was black folks that said no. But we got a Mexican town. You got a Greek town, but you can't have a black town with a 90% black folks. If that ain't anti-blackness, I don't know what the fuck anti-blackness is.
And on that, I definitely want to shout out, and he's in effect one of the mentees of, and that effort definitely was one of, when I think of economist scholars, Dr. Claude Anderson, Black Labor, White Wealth, Powernomics, one of his key mentees, Dr. Ken Harris is in effect right now. African Town researched that. Mama Watson, Joanne Watson was there fighting hard for that. Rest in peace, Barbara Rose Collins, one of the people fighting hard for that. That definitely is one of those anchors and shadows of the Dennis Archer administration that go against, the same way he was kind of against the black casino as well. You know, Dennis Archer's alignment when it comes to black thought and black theory was not that strong. And as we get right into that, it just goes right into the segue of leadership and legacy.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking leadership, legacy, haves, have-nots. I mean, I like that I got to that point, and you touched on that with African Town. I touched on Dennis Archer. Dennis Archer is a classic example of when we think of leadership. I feel as though a lot of the people throughout the black community feel as though he did not align with the black community. His ideology was not there. Right. And on the other side, grander society, white society, look at him as he was the greatest mayor in recent history for the city of Detroit, help get the city shaped up and everything. Legacy, leadership, as you definitely think from an individual perspective, because it's a way to be in the role of leadership and build a legacy where you will be applauded from America, but looked at from the community as, like you say, that sellout card is going to come fast.
Again, I think it goes back to the ideology, right? And two prominent ideologies that has been at the center or three of black folks in America. Either we go back to Africa, how do we integrate in America and be full Americans, or we separate and do our own or be independent. And those three ideologies are still shaping us in some forms. Some of us, it may be more prominent than others. And if you're honest with yourself and you go back and re-examine, you'll find yourself somewhere either on one of those timelines or in between. And so when you look at Dennis Archer, and even going back to Coleman Young, right? And to talk about Coleman Young in a negative way is like, it's like the Antichrist. And it
can be sacrilegious in Detroit.
And because of his association with the leftist Marxists, I think he gets more credit as being more radical than he was. He was a politician at the end of the day, right? But his interest came out of the black bottom. I think that kept him grounded. Mm-hmm. Where you look at a Dennis Archer, he's black, but he doesn't come out of a black bottom. He comes out of a different community, even though he may come out of poverty. And then again, many of us, if we go back to talk, poverty is such a hard pill to swallow, right? Man, I ain't going back to that shit. Don't. Like, if you try to drive a motherfucker on decks, they gonna fight you. They probably put like, man, you take me over there, I'm gonna kill, because it brings so much misery and pain. And it's legit at the same time, but we cannot heal what we're afraid to confront. And as a result, we're trying to fathom something different for our people, again, using white theories as a solution for black phenomena. And as I said earlier, the dynamic of, because there's been times when through my process, through my growth, through my transformation, through becoming who I am, where I found myself in a, like when I was working at the Bog, doing work with the Bog Center, and which is a very alternative crowd, and I'm very grateful for that. But it was, when I think back, there was a lot of contradictions, because they're not black per se, so they didn't understand the black struggle in the way I understood it, particularly in my time period. So there was some bumping of some heads, but then also in that same token, I had a relationship with Wendell Anthony over a fellowship, because again, once someone sees some potential in you, they try to scoop you up, they try to pull you up under their wing, right? and everybody's trying to shape me to be a certain type of way. And for me, I had to the key, that word again, play the game. You had to learn how to play the game to some degree to figure out how to do for yourself, right? But also you're trying to work with other Black people, but they're trying to get you to work a certain way. Yeah. And they're not realizing, at my core, I'm for Black liberation. In my core, I'm for Black liberation. So, but I learn how to coexist and engage and whatnot. And I bring that up. I'm gonna write about it more in my book that I'm my new book I'm gonna work on. But it's these things, like when we think about our own individual experience, we've engaged in those things in some way, and because of use Wendell for example, right? Depending on what time period. When Wendell was on Dexter and Elmer, that's a different Wendell. Matter of fact, he didn't even go by Wendell. He had an African name. Like if someone was like, damn, Wendell Anthony had an African name. He was out there organizing, engaging the Young Boys Incorporated, et cetera, et cetera. But the Wendell today is not the same Wendell. Not meaning that we can't grow, we can't change. But the question is, what we have to ask is the interest. Has the interest changed? Of what was determining how we're moving and what decisions that we're making and how, because again, all of us, we deal with people outside our community, good, bad, or different, right? But at the end of the day, no one can ever question my interest. And I mean, people respect me, people disagree with me, but they'll always say, that motherfucker, he fight for his neighborhood. He fight for his neighborhood. That's what he do. That's one thing that motherfucker could do. He gonna fight for Black folks. He consistent on that, right? He may say some shit that you may not like. He may cuss you out. He may look like he gonna hit you, but he gonna stay consistent with that, right? And that's the key word, consistency. And this is what contributing to the breakdown of what legacy leadership looks like. And there's an individual, I mean, just name it, right? Because I hate talking in code and shit, like Malik Shabazz. I respect Malik Shabazz on some level, right? But again, since there was no organization, there was no elders to hold him accountable, he became a community mercenary. Time out. I got to bring the camera back to me. I never even heard that term before. Community mercenary. That's a new one that I'm going to definitely attribute to you. That's a deep one. Continue. Yeah, and so many of us, become that community mercenaries because, again, why we live in a capitalist society. What we know about in community organizing and activism, that's a payless job. Ain't no health care in that fucking job. No. So if you've been on the front line and now expanding the conversation for how many years, who doesn't want to feel worthy of what they've done, what they've contributed? And this is where it gets complicated. And I'm under the belief, I was thinking the other morning, like, we can't afford to throw no Black person away. I agree with you there too. However, we have to examine every Black person to be able to understand, like Eldridge Cleaver. Like most like, man, I am that motherfucker. He ended up being turned crazy as hell. He did. But we have to still examine him. Because why? There's an Eldridge Cleaver in our community today who's behaving just like him. Egomaniac. And also to that point, I also think that this kind of goes back to that same discussion we've been having more and more, like discourse. We got to be able to have discourse and hold people accountable and have those uncomfortable conversations amongst one another, because one of the key points about this law definitely, I think, goes into intentionality too. And when you're younger, or even if you're older, the understanding is that every person is moving with an intentionality, but sometimes I believe this is due to a defense mechanism. Sometimes our intentionality is just because another person's doing it. It's like, hey, Yusef asked me for this, and then it's going to be a level of trust there. But then you have to have the willingness to say, all right, Yusef, you're introducing me to this project. Who are the people? What are the terms? What's the logistics? Are there costs? Who else will be involved? How will we execute this? We had a discussion like that yesterday about a project that you just asked me to onboard for. Right. As close as we are, we still have that discussion. And for some people, that discussion is tougher to have, because if you're out here protesting every day and then we're marching in front of this restaurant or this liquor store or this gas station, and then it's like, all right, 1 second. All right, what about this?
I know the problem. What's the intentionality? What role do I play? I mean, even having that, how do we get to that point of being comfortable enough to ask these questions that can be challenging questions?
We have to be fearful, fearless. We have to be caring, loving, and very, very critical, right? And there, like I said earlier, all of us in this room may feel powerless at some point because of our own individual position, but in reality, there's power in there. And that power grows once we connect and build and find a commonality amongst each other. And that commonality is not rooted in whether we like each other. That commonality is rooted in our values, a common value system. Values trumps like. And I think that's where we've gotten away from in our struggle. That's where we got away from in our work. Like, again, we don't all have to agree. We can all share different ideology. And like our history teaches us that. And I think we're not sophisticated enough because we don't want to do that work. We're not white lazy, we're black lazy. And what I mean by black lazy, like we're not doing our own work of studying our own selves to learn what we need to learn. Because it's there. It's all there to learn from and to develop. But then again, what's happening is they're picking us off because they're, Juwan, you're doing good. Quasi, you're doing good. Truth, you're doing, like we're no longer the black fist. We're the individuals. But we only come to black fist and stuff like this. But this is temporary, where we're dealing with permanent shit. And also, too, again, Quasi and I was talking this morning, and one thing that came out of it we don't talk about is trust. How many, a lot of folks in this room, we know each other, but how many people in this room you really trust? No, it's something like, and we're talking about, we use the S word a lot, struggle. If there's no trust, there's no struggle. And until we develop and frame that, then that because that's what our elder generation, they had us beat at. Even though they fucked up a lot, they trusted each other. They got in the trenches, they got in the weeds. I mean, Fred, like we all lift up Fred Hampton. He was a dynamic brother. He fell up under the leadership of Bobby Seale and UAP Newton. He didn't want to be the grand leader. He could have. Bunchy Carter, damnly in his own right. I mean, we can go on down the list. Like Malcolm wasn't trying to take Elijah Muhammad's place. It was what people fed Elijah and what others fed because, again, interest. Their interest was for themselves, and they knew Malcolm's interest was for black people. And what Malcolm said, I can deal with a lot of things, but I couldn't deal with was betrayal. That hurted me more than any. Why? Because what we don't talk about with Malcolm and Elijah, they also had like a father and son relationship. That hurt him to his core. But again, my point is, though, Malcolm was not trying to replace Elijah Muhammad. But in this room, how many of us can get behind a Lauren Hood? How many of us can get behind a Khary and saying that we're going to work together? Like that takes some real deep soul searching and also figuring out like, okay, we're going to be behind Lauren tomorrow. We're going to be behind such and such the next day, like creating this, but how we're being very sophisticated because, again, we're at war. But the question is, what is the strategy that we're having to deal with our war? And so I talked about Marcus Garvey earlier, where they was able to raise millions of dollars in poor economic times. How the hell we can't raise it now and there's more money? And I'm not trying to, I'm not going to pull a Umar and crucify you and where you ain't giving us no money. But however, we have to be able to create very legit things because people want to donate, but they want to know what they're donating to. But also, when we was building this, I didn't know everything. I'm a very impromptu dude. I figured some shit out and I jumped straight in.
Yes.
That's how I am. I didn't know the marketing plan. I didn't know none of that shit. I didn't waste time to even ask. I want this, I'm gonna figure it out. And I bring that up and critiquing myself is who in my community that can help me in that way? And then you may not have the determination. I can help you with the determination, right? This is how we build, and this is how we create the legacy. Because I can tell everybody in this room all the great shit I did as an individual. Repeat, as an individual. But can we talk about all the great shit we done together as a collective?
And I guess that's as we move into the next topic, I feel everything is so interconnected. Because, you know, people will look at me the same way and say, wow, you did this, you did that. Everything I've ever done, whenever I involve more people, the success becomes more abundant, you know. And I'm also like, between the unity, it's also the patience too. Because that's the other thing that I do feel that's onboarded through this lens of capitalism. It's like the lack of patience and having the understanding that sometimes in that patience, brick by brick, as I say, you know, building that wall brick by brick,
Right.
it takes a longer time, but the foundation becomes stronger. You know, it becomes almost something that can't be shaken as fast. When I think of the way we work together,
Right.
you know, we work together, and I feel that the flow works well. And we've been working together for 10 plus years now. Maybe 12, maybe longer than that. But it'll be like, you'll call with an idea. I do know you do work fast. Yusef's like, hey, let's do this tomorrow. And I'm like, all right, I don't know if I can do that tomorrow.
So when I first came home, Quasi used to call me the guy with many man of many ideas, right?
Yes.
He started screening my phone calls.
And it's funny that you bring up Quasi, because now I'm working with Quasi a little bit more, and I know he has a different flow. So as the three of us build a solution, and then we can welcome in others sometimes in that foundation. Because
let's substitute that word solution, because that's a very tricky word.
Okay. Well, then let's say
it's liberation, man. This is again, we're substituting, and we're down. When we think we're upgrading, we're really downgrading. And we're tricking ourselves out because of the society that we live in. We're trying to create language to try to coexist, but we're psyching ourselves out. Like with freedom, what we was fighting for freedom then is not the same freedom that we're talking about now. Like we've taken Black liberation and put it in a social justice framework. That's not Black liberation. By working at nonprofits and saying that we're holding political education classes, that we're getting millions of dollars from Skillman Foundation or Kellogg, whatever, it's still that's not independence. That's not self-determination. But also, to your point, like, capitalism is a language. It's not only an economic system, it's a language system too. And let me hypnotize the language system. I'm the founder of the Mama Akua Community House. Mm-hmm. I'm the founder of such and such. Like, why do I need to say that when everybody knows I'm the founder? But I need to say that because that's what the society tells me I need to express to make myself greater than anybody. Again, if everybody in this room, go back to the dynamic of working together, is helping me pull off something. We're helping each other. And the first thing everybody say, I'm the founder. How does it going to make you feel? Like, God damn, I ain't shit.
And see, and that's where I would push back on you and say that even the term solution and founder, I don't have the same connotations connected to it, though I do understand
it's a European concept,
but
it's a European concept. That's the problem.
But English itself is a European concept.
It doesn't, but we have to figure out how to use it towards our greater good.
And I would say that the term solution and founder is still terms that I'm using that I believe at this point I'm executing for, as you say, a grander, you use the term grander because liberation.
Right. But let's look at the value though. Mm-hmm. The value of the terminology devalues everybody else. So again, if you're working by yourself, I think it'll fit. But if you're working with other people and you're trying to get other people involved, in which if I'm always beating the drum saying, I'm the founder, it's my shit. Why would I want to work with you?
And I wouldn't perceive it in that nature. I would look at it like, I could see it's like anything that, like, the language can be triggering for others. So the same way that you say, like, yeah, driving down Dexter can damn near bring about toxic shock for one person. I hear solution and I'm not triggered to think as though, obviously, it's implying as though I've been living without a solution. I see it different. But for this discussion, more so for the point, I was just painting the picture of me, you, and Quasi working together.
Absolutely.
And building brick by brick. The functionality and the utility and the way that we work together resourcefully, that's an understanding that builds over time. And I believe that leaving the door open for others to come into this, in that understanding respectfully of what we're building, and we have a door that's open for that, that's where we're exercising ourselves. We're exercising our capacity. We're exercising our understanding.
So this ties back into our conversation me, you and Joe had last night.
Yep.
What is a critical thinker?
Right?
Yep. We all agree that we live in a society where people are taught what to think instead of how to think. I repeat, people are taught what to think and how to think. So if we all agree and believe in that, then we have to be self-aware of the things that we say. So again, if we throw the word solution out there, and without as you eloquently has informed us, the nuances and the context, it leads to as if that's the absolute. That's what I'm saying. By the absolute should be liberation. The absolute should be working together. Because the solution is leading towards that. So that's why I'm not saying we shouldn't use solution, but we should be careful how we use it, because it can be misinterpreted from someone else. Because what we all get in this room, I believe everybody in this room is active in some way, right? I'm gonna join you when you start, bro. No, that's what people like. Yo, bro, Lauren, I love what you're doing. Well, when you gonna come help me do it? And because we don't see ourselves in the struggle, I just see you part of the solution. So the goal is how do we expand it where other folks can see themselves part of that?
And I would say to that, definitely the context is needed, and giving those definitions. And that's where the political education, and I'm becoming more and more aware of the need for that political education as time goes. But my success, because I see all of my success tying into others, and that others is family, friends, my network,
right,
my community. I'm most at home there. So I don't see an individual success for me.
Right.
I would see me being, it's like the turn of the new year. If I was on South Beach in the biggest condo, and chilling in Miami, I would not see that as success.
Right.
I see success as being on Clements in my neighborhood, connecting with my neighbors, my OGs, and then some of them, as you say, some of them are old heads, meaning they elders and may not have as much game to give, but sometimes the game is observed and not necessarily told. That's the success for me. And if that success is not given, because that's the place that I feel that I'm most at home, I'm most comfortable, it's more designed for me, and it's a place where we can build collectively together, then it ain't success. I see a lot of these other institutions as built and designed for what white success is. I was in one of those discussions. It's so funny with at the Bog Center, because I work with the Bog Center too, and they were discussing having a safe space. And the first thing I said is, as a Black man in America, I don't even entertain no shit like that, because I don't think that a safe space exists for me as a Black man in America. This is some ideology that you're putting on top of shit. Right. So that's me putting those words and that mirror in that same concept. But the closest thing to a safe space is my neighborhood, or what some may label as the hood.
Right. So, and I'm pretty sure a lot of us in this room feel safe in those spaces, right? But the problem is we're not examining what's creating those spaces. And so again, the solution is maybe the Mama Akua community house. Is
liberation.
The Black Panther Party. Huey P. Newton said the breakfast program was not a solution. It's a means to the solution. It's not the solution. It's a means to the. So what do you mean by mean? It's the means by bringing people together. It's the means by serving the needs of the people. It's the means by through those means you help transforming. And also, I'll bring in what Fred Hampton talked about when the police was coming and harassing them and the families, the mothers, and saying, well, that's a communist program that they're doing. Those are socialists over there, right? And the mothers would say, I don't know what a communist is, nor do I know what a socialist is, but I know they're feeding my family. And if you try to remove that program, I'm going to do something to you. So remember what we said earlier, people learn through participation and observation. People don't remember what you said, but they remember how you felt. So through that process and through that program, they're being transformed. But as my comrade Quasi challenges me in those type of programs I do, where they just can't be charity. They can't be social welfare type of program. It has, again, that is a solution, but the ultimate solution is about power. And so hold up. So about power, and so in that power, again, with your homeboys, how do we transform that community to where, because to take ownership. Like when we had the urban network, one of my homeboys, may he rest in peace, Roger, uh, Julia, I think Putman, who runs the Ball Center School, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're very close. We was close then. We still close. And she was coming to meet me at my other institution that was on Grand River McGraw, over mind you where the Olympia Stadium used to be. There's what they're now the Armor Guard.
Yeah.
Julia didn't get out of her car because she didn't feel safe because of the young black men that was standing in front of the store. And my homeboy Roger was part of that group. When I see him, I tell him, like, she didn't feel safe. He was highly upset. He was a fucking offended. Like, what do you mean she didn't feel safe, homeboy? Like, she didn't feel safe, bro. It wasn't that you was going to do anything, but it's the perception of what black men represents in the society, whether you did something or not. And so how do we change that perception? How do we change that perception? Because someone is communicating, as you in this field, in media propaganda, a certain images in our mind that is triggering. And some of it, again, what we know about myths, there's some truth and there's some bullshit to it. Yeah. And what happens is we have to engage in it to figure out what is the truth, to be able to eliminate the bullshit. The same thing when we, like in that same spot, we had the studio. The studio was a great tool to bring young brothers in. Going back to young folks, right? They all of them rapping their ass off. Talking about killing, murder, money making murder, right? And I would come in and like, man, why you want to kill everybody? Why you selling dope? Explain to people why you had to kill or why you want to kill. Explain to people why you had to sell dope or why you want to sell dope. Not as if this is just the fucking norm. And the light went off. I'm not saying like you can't talk about it, but can you talk about it in a way that's going to educate someone, that you're going to invite them into your world? Because here's the thing so in the larger context of this have and have nots, we're talking about two different worldviews. We're talking about two different worldviews that are at odds with each other. And it's closer to those who are the have nots. In reality, we all fucking have nots. Some of us may just drive a little better car than someone else. Might be I live off of 8 Mile now. Don't live off on Zone 8, right? But in reality is, if I drive down 8 Mile, I'm liable to get pulled over just from driving down Black. It doesn't matter where I live in the fucking city because we know what happens over there. And until we are able to navigate through this bullshit, because there's this false reality that this is what capitalism does. What money does, it gives you a false reality as if shit changes. Like when Jay-Z gets his money in the thing that racism act that happened in New York and say, I'm just gonna buy the restaurant. Like that doesn't change the dynamics. No. That's a temporary situation. So at the end of the day, it's about analysis. What are the type of analysis that we're having, which comes out of our reading, comes out of our PE, political education classes, to be able to develop the type of frameworks to change the type of systems and dynamics to move things forward the way we want.
Deep. And you spoke on this from the next point is more so dealing with as we're getting closer to a close, housing and public spaces. You spoke on housing and the value of the housing stock and what that means to our community and what it means to all communities, really. But housing and public spaces are becoming a lot different for Detroiters right now. I know a lot of Detroiters just looking for rental spaces, and it's almost impossible. Many Detroiters are bracing themselves for what looks like another economic collapse, of another housing crisis looming. And public spaces, when we think of the public spaces and the investment in these public spaces, as this is definitely tied to the gentrification impacting Detroit right now. I want you to speak on that haves and have-nots of that need for those public spaces and where housing is standing in reference to that.
I think housing is essential, right? It is what they say is it's your peace. It's where you lay your head at, and it helps determine what you're going to do and how you're going to face the world. But when you look at the framework, like when we're moving out, we've moved out of Zone 8, we moved out of Linwood, we moved out of Mac and Bewood, and who have replaced us in those areas? White folks. There's more white folks in what we call the hood than ever in our lifetime. In our lifetime, right? Yeah. And it's interesting because the reason that we say we won't move over there is the reason why they say they want to move over there. Like, I feel safe. And it's like we're because again we've been tricked. We're going out, we're buying these cheesy ass houses in the suburbs, and these 30 ass houses that have some life and character to them. They need some work, and they're fixing them up. But again, and I'm simplifying it because what we know too is they're getting the grants, they're getting the loans, they're getting all the access to the resources, et cetera, right? But are we building the type of organization, the type of structures to addressing these different dynamics, but more importantly, internally within our community, and this is what's creating this such a divide, because the grass is not greener on the other side. Doesn't mean that we all can't, everybody has to stay and live together in the same spot. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I don't think none of us should believe that. But however, we should create a vision. Because democracy doesn't stop at the top, start at the top. Democracy starts at the bottom. It starts with poor people and being able to fix and solve solutions, bringing solutions to the poor people, and creating sustainability. But what's happening in poor communities? They're not getting access to invest in their community, to build up the type of houses that they need to create the sustainability. Like in my neighborhood, there's an organization that's trying to rebuild Zone 8, what they call Northwest Goldberg, in their own image and likeness. So again, say if you're someone, you're third generation living in a neighborhood, particularly this neighborhood, and you haven't had no one from work on your house in 3 decades. And you're saying you're about community, and you built up 3 or 4 houses, how you gonna feel? You're gonna feel a certain type of way.
Yeah.
And this is what's continuing to create the dilapidation, to create the despair, the hopelessness. And this is what we have to resolve. And again, how do we pull our resources together? I think we have, and I believe all of us say that we have enough tools within our community. We have people, carpenters, we have roofers and whatnot.
I mean, I still have the video of what this house was when you first got it. Yeah. He stayed here a night, and it was a wild.
I stayed 15 days.
Well, I came in here for the night you stayed. The first night, it looked like a trap house for real. But the creativity and when people walk in this space and you see doors, reconditioned doors, wood finished, like. It took creativity to pour into this space, and now you have something that's very dynamic, unique, and still sturdy as you speak to it. So you can talk a little bit about that and tie that to being in public spaces. We see food coming in now, coming in the door for this. The need for public spaces too, because before we had our spaces, we'd often want to do a lot more stuff, and we'd be like, "Where can we go? Where can we go? Where can we go? Where can we go? Where can you do something like this?"
But also, tying into the what I was just saying previously, when folks see what we do in our community, and many of us in this place own institutions that the houses or the lots that we renovated was fucked up. People have walked past for years and years and years, and so that dilapidation of that area begins to take root in that person. And so when Lauren's going to transform the building that she's working on, when Juan transformed what he did and what you did, that's power. That's providing hope. That's providing vision. Because again, what was there? Man, that was a fucked up ass building. But now but more importantly, the vision becomes more real when they can tie it to a very authentic person that's stopping and saying, you're welcome here. You're invited here. And they walk in, they feel the love, they feel the warmth, and the barriers that's preventing us from engaging each other, they begin to tear down. And like, oh shit, like I can do this at my house. Well, I can do something similar to this. Because again, there's no one or that doesn't think about, again, of doing something great in their community. But just because they're so overwhelmed with oppression and they have not saw how to do it, they get down on themselves. And so all of us create some type of opportunity to what transformation looks like. Same thing, I ain't into garden, but I do love the look of a nice ass garden, right? Again, it was nothing there. It was weeds and blah, blah, blah. You go over this shit growing all over, you can eat and whatever. That's power. That can be communicated to a community. Because again, we've been stuck here for so long, we have not seen that type of power. Because we think of power in a different type of way. And if we can harness that, because the power relies is based upon what we built is to what? Not serve us. Guess what? And this is what goes back to us not removing ourselves as using the language as founders and emphasizing what's the purpose of what we're doing. It's designed to serve people. If that's our language, then let's communicate that it should be less about us and more about them. It should be less about us and more about them, even in our language and everything. And so this is what makes a place like the Mama Akua House and all the other communities. So like the question is, how do we pull those things together? Because by default, we end up competing with each other because we're not controlling the landscape. We're all searching for resources. So just imagine if we all pull together, we're going to try to raise $10 million together. That would be powerful. But the hard work is how we going to break the $10 million up?
Yeah, you got that right.
But it's doable.
I agree.
It's more than doable. But are we committed to that type of work? Yeah. And because at the end of the day, I know for myself, the 7.5 years that it took to renovate this, that almost broke me. And I only can imagine a lot of you guys in work that you do and your passion. When you go home and after a hard day, and you're like, man, I don't even want to do this shit no more.
I mean, and then not to mention the DTE bills and, just the upkeep and the maintenance of this space.
And like the new movie with the Will Smith, right? The individual with the whips. Like we all got those. We don't have those physical whips, but we got those mental whips. We have those spiritual whips that just beating the shit out of us. And then some of us like, man, you just got a fetish for pain. I ain't got a fetish for pain. I got a fetish for liberation.
Yeah. And that brings right, like your points are just like leading right through to, and you spoke to this too, nonprofit organizations and community groups. Let's speak to that.
Again, I think the framework is creating jobs for people in our community, and that's not a bad thing. The bad thing is that they've superseded the grassroots levels of our community. And the question is, how do we reverse that? Where the grassroots are now serving the nonprofits versus the nonprofits serving the grassroots. And the problem is, I remember brother named Bokiba, older brother.
Oh, yeah, the OG.
Definitely OG, right?
Yeah.
And he was telling me like when Coleman Young got elected, first thing he did was he hired all the street organizers. In the grand scheme of things, it looked good, but there was no one to replace the street organizers. And the same thing in these nonprofit organizations, they're snatching our boldest and our brightest up. And the dynamic is that we have not created economic opportunities to create jobs for them, for them to remain in the position that they are. And then where we're not losing all of them in them, but then two, we're not creating enough spaces to have conversations because there's no unified design plan how to go into, because we all agree that it's the nonprofit industrial complex, correct?
And with that, I have a question for you, because you work with the Michigan Roundtable, right. But in that role, it's more like the term is entrepreneur, but you're more of a social entrepreneur. Right. So how did you have the courage to negotiate a relationship where your work becomes a part of your work? Because usually it's like, okay, I got this job, so I got to stop all of the community projects that I've been doing, and they have me because I'm doing one community project. We may do one dinner a year. They may pick up one program. Right. It's so interrelated. Like, How did you have that courage? How did you speak that for the young brother watching? And I'm assuming it's going to be a lot of young brothers and sisters that are looking for something like that, because we meet some of the enthusiastic young people that are like, how do we do this? How do we do this? How do we do this? And if they end up in that position working with an organization, how do they keep doing their work for their community on their purpose, but also align with an organization where they're working symbiotically?
So the coldest game I ever got was from an OG in Milwaukee. He said, "Young blood, don't negotiate. Don't negotiate your fears. Negotiate your self worth. I mean your worth." And a lot of times we going in places negotiating our fears, not our worth.
Explain.
I mean, we're too busy worried about whether they're going to accept us. You know, we're overthinking. Shall I look this way? And when he said that, because that's how. Because for me, there was no entry point, and I think for a lot of us, we just had to figure this shit out. And so as you figure it out, you're making mistakes, but you're always questioning yourself because there's someone's always over you, or you feel like someone because the reality we're infiltrating or coming more into a white hegemony space, whether that however that may look. And so as a result, again, the road to get in there has been cleared. It has not been connected to the dots of how to follow the next person. So in understanding that, but then fortunate when I was recruited, so it's two phenomena. My coworker at the time, Stacy, I did a lot of some of the work of clearing some of the pathway, but also again coming in, and Stacy's a white woman who understood some of the dynamics and challenging within the organization. So when we coming in, knowing what I brought, and I've been doing this, I've been working for myself for almost 10 years. So I'm not about to relinquish anything, but also I was a missing link to the organization. So again, if I went in from my fears, I couldn't appreciate what I brought. My value was able to come in with my value. Not saying I'm above the organization, I'm better than the organization, but it matters. But because also too, again, going back to negotiation, a lot of times when a lot of organizations, they want to own your intellectual property, except depends on how you come into the organization. I came in at a point again, same thing like what you in hip hop, right? Yeah. Selling CDs out my trunk. Yeah. Me working out my trunk created enough cachet where my negotiations
were different,
stronger. Versus if I didn't have none of that, put me in a different box because the system, the bureaucracy is what the bureaucracy is. Are there ways to maneuver around it? Absolutely. But it's years of working, but also understood who I was and what I was and what I represented, and being humble in that dynamic, and then the value of the missing piece. But I mean, like, what's the group? Linda Campbell, and then what's the name of her group? People's Platform. So they did it. That book they did, right? The People's Atlas. I had participated in the video interviews a long time before they decided to convert it into a book. So they came back to all of us and said, we're gonna convert this into a book. By that time, I had already written and published 3 books, so I'm familiar with intellectual property, all those things. So they give me a contract. I'm going to do it because I believe in it. But then you give me a generic basic contract that say I own this, I own that. No, we're gonna change this language to be more people oriented. And some, again, because we don't know our worth, we don't feel like we can't do that. Also, we feel as a poor oppressed person, we've been conditioned to see us less than. That doesn't make us less. There's actually power in there. But we have, like Fred Hampton talks about, Fred Hampton Jr., there's shame that comes with being oppressed. And I think we all could say, we look at ourselves, have wore that shame at some point, right? Mm-hmm. And once we get able to cleanse ourselves of that, we can see our strengths, despite whatever our circumstances is. And and then we look at our households and our history, that strength, that beauty was always there. Our mama, our grandmothers, our grandfathers holding down against whatever obstacle. So if we can take that into our negotiations, it puts us in a greater space. Because also we have to be, again, if you can't set my terms in, so be it. But that's the problem. Because of our oppression, we feel like we got to take every deal. And like I had to learn, I remember, like when somebody said, well, I'm gonna give you $10,000. I'm gonna get right now, Yusef. You can get a cash, you can get a check, or you can get cash. Or I can give you a contact list that's worth $100,000. Most of us gonna take the $10,000.
Yes.
Right then, because we want cash on hand. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna take the $100,000 list. I know it requires a lot of work, but what my work has taught me, there may be somebody on that list that can introduce me to $1 million. I'm not chasing it. I know my worth. And my worth comes out of communication, out of relationships. Because once that 10,000 gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
But you could build a relationship with someone that's worth more than $10,000.
I really like that point. You just gave a lot of game, a lot, because I feel like you're speaking to me now, but more so to a younger me and a lot of the people that are looking to get in this work to know. I like that you said negotiate from the value you bring, and don't just drop the work you're doing, because we've seen that. And I'm looking at so many of the comments. Quasi's ineffective in person, and he's dropping comments like, yeah, and laying some game down, because it's real. We can be, and sometimes our complacency can be, it's implicit. They're not even asking. We just imply. It's like, all right, well, man, now that I joined here, let me take off my kente cloth. Let me not, let me not put Black Lives Matter as much on my Facebook page, my Instagram. I'm working now. I don't want to be seen as a radical, or you say militant, or things like that. And I'm using that as just more so placeholders to say you can still do your work. You can definitely still do your work. The reason you're in the room is because they wanted you to do the work. And the last thing that we're talking about, entrepreneurship and business. What role in haves and have nots? As we definitely see the landscapes of businesses and communities like ours are different than communities outside of where we live and stay. And then at that point, we're going to be open for comment and question for the people here. Thank you for everybody watching and participating. This is year 2, brick by brick by brick, decade thinking. Yusef, it's on you.
I mean, it's about an ideology around the type of business that you're trying to create. So I referenced earlier the Urban Network. That was the first institution that I was able to help build. And when I was talking about earlier, impromptu, like that shit was really impromptu. I'm walking down Grand River, and I'm like, damn, they got a rent sign on here. I know the owner, the A-Rag guy, Sam. And I'm like, man, I want to rent the spot. Matter of fact, me and Joe Black was, at that time I had a record company called Urban Grill Entertainment. Joe Black was an artist. He was a producer on it. I was trying to be my Sugar Puff Daddy, some shit like that, right?
Hilarious.
And I was going through a transitional phase, and we brought the equipment in, right? I had no business plan. I had nothing but a heart and determination. And my budget was love. My budget was hope. My budget was I give a fuck. That was it, right? And again, going back to relationships, because of my relationship with the Bog Center, it was a foundation out of California that they finally came out of like TV or something, right? They came and they interviewed us. They gave everybody interviewed $20,000. Took the $20,000, invested in the Urban Network. First rule of thumb, I'm so immature in this. You don't invest that type of money into a building that you don't own. But I'm trying to serve my people. I put my people first. I'm not thinking about none of those things when I don't know those. This is my first time engaged in the business. My comrade Quasi, at that time, he and other comrades, they started multiple business. They were working together, and then brought him. We're working together on one level. Now we're working together on another level, which we had to learn each other. And then he would, because I would come in, and I treat it like my clubhouse. I would lay on the couch, take my shoes off, and just be chilling. Like, man, bro, this is a business. If you're gonna do this, you go home. Take your ass home, right? I'm very young in this, but also the story. There was a story attached to what the business that I was able to create, and not knowing how to manage the story. And I share everybody, like, we're bigger than our story. We're bigger than our story. Our story doesn't make us, and that's what America does. It pimps the shit out of our stories. And I can admit now I was overwhelmed with just being a fucking story. It ate at me. It bothered the fuck out of me. I'm just a fucking story because I'm nothing but a social prostitute in the grand scheme of things. And transitioning to here, like, even though I helped build this, my vision is for this to be a cooperative space. This is bigger than the individual. You know, again, it has the feel good, the neighborhood I grew up on, right down the street from the block that I grew up on. But this is why I'm talking about like liberation. If this is about liberation, it's beyond my block. It's beyond my individual story. So, but in our business, we tied in community service, community programs, where people see firsthand. If you buy, you know, get the kitchen going on, you know, with Vegan Tuesday, you support this. You're supporting the annual backpack event. You know, when you come out, you rent the Mama Akua house. It allows us to allow communities people to use it for free. Again, this is where we're creating the balance. Also, again, having opportunities to. I mean, like someone just rented it for a birthday party, right? And it was on the coldest day that Friday. It was like 2 degrees.
More power to that person that stuck through with their birthday that day.
And the house and the furnace didn't want to get
hot enough
for no. And she kept saying, "Man, it's gonna get hot."
Hey, we get coat on party as a December baby. Sometimes it's like that.
And she didn't ask for no money back. I just volunteered. It go $100 back, right? And just forward thinking. Again, this is how we do keeping things 100. And when we do business with our people like that, we have to look at all sides and being able to be conducive to each other. And that's the difference from working at other spots, but also being conducive to us. Yeah. You know, they're always trying to come in and lowball us and et cetera. But like, I'm going to work with you. I'm going to give you the best price. If you come in and go like, bam, you know, I wanted 2 days and whatever, you can use it next month too for free. Because again, the more you do, because that's what the Urban Network taught me. The more people see it, yeah, that goes back to networking. Through your network, I learn your network, and they learn about our spot. And that's where, again, seeing that even though we may not talk a lot, I see your value. Even though we haven't talked about it, because I know I can't exist without you. And vice versa. That is a belief system that I have. Again, diminishing the I in the individual. So that's a part of the business that we don't talk about. And how we can create new opportunities for each other. But the problem is being oppressed people, we're all trying to do the same thing. And so going back, how do we create a system, an ecosystem where we're doing not necessarily the same thing, but we're figuring how on timelines. So we got this here, we're gonna do this, we're gonna help you do this. We're not having those type of conversations. And there's nothing wrong, because again, you know, John do this over there, Susie do that. But there's no coordination, because we're all serving the same people. And then so if everybody in this room got a GoFundMe up, I mean, that's the most craziest shit ever, right? Everybody got the same fundraising, who we fundraising from? From the same people. Mm-hmm. Oh, this month I'm gonna get a Jawan. Next month I'm gonna get a Khary. 6 months I'm gonna get a Lauren. You know what I mean? Like this is versus how do we get in the room and we create a centralized space? Yeah. Like we talk about anti-capitalism, but we don't talk about cooperative economics enough, where we created a practice. That's how we defeat capitalism. Yeah. By creating a practice, but that practice comes out of building relationship. So again, business is a means to how to serve people, but also a means how to uplift our own selves through the work that we do. Because again, some of us have, like I have a job, I don't have to depend on the Mama Akua house. Whereas others, they may have to depend on that. And we should be sensitive to that and create opportunities. How do we support that? Because again, I'm under the belief if the Mama Akua house go down tomorrow, your spot next. And your Quasi spot next, right? So we need all Lauren's spot is going to be in jeopardy in the future. Because again, what does it communicate to the larger community? That none of us are valuable. Yeah. If we can't keep our institutions, because Black institutions have played a crucial role in the development of Black people to aspire for Black transformation and liberation.
I was going to say Black liberation definitely go right with Black institutions. I hear so much Mama Shoshana speaking, and it blows my mind that, you know, Malcolm X grassroots was right there on Dexter for most of my life, and I never just like really crossed paths. Like it was in my circumference. Like it was there in my space. We be sometimes playing basketball on Dexter and Homer. And I'm like, damn, this was like down the street. But like those spaces really matter. So at this point, that concludes the questions for me. I don't know what comments, questions. We got some people in the room. I don't want to have to start calling on people. Quasi's been hitting the tab the whole time. But let's get some more feedback. Let's be collaborative. Last year, when we did year one, when we think of the history of this, it was still COVID. It was me and Yusef, and I want to say it was like snow on the ground and everything, but it was interactive. So glad for everybody that tuned in via online. So let's get somebody to the mic here. Let's get some people to the mic here. Okay, and some people are. We have food. Yeah, if you want to get some food, that's definitely open. We definitely want to do that. Hold on. I'm gonna get to this. We should have aligned the camera a little bit more. Joe, can you align the camera more? We're just doing our camera adjustments, but you know. So just angle it down a little bit. I would just angle the right at the head. Yep. Perfect. All right. Let's get a sound check from you, Lauren.
Check one, check. Check.
Okay, 1 sec. Why don't I hear her? I know she's in effect. All right, she just lower. There we go.
You got it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Yusef, for doing this and starting this tradition of the state of Black Detroit. Whenever you speak, it always, brings to the front of my mind how much more we need to collaborate. And as you know, like I rent this space upstairs, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna see Yusef all the time. We're gonna be working together. And then still, there remains work to be done. So I appreciate you for putting that at the forefront of my mind. But as you just left off talking about institutions, I recently became a board member at the Charles H. Wright.
Right.
I have a vision for that institution serving more of the masses. You know, I think in recent years it has become this place that really just serves the Black elite. And I think it should do more to serve the majority Black population in the city. So from your standpoint, what can be or should be the role of our African American History Museum in this majority Black city today and beyond? What should and could that institution be doing to serve more Black folks?
That's a great question. I think fundamentally we all struggle with learning who we are. So as a historical institution, it definitely can play a crucial role in that. I think we need more people who are people driven there. I don't have a membership there. And the reason I don't have a membership there is as a result of resisting the dynamics over there. I don't think it serve the population of people that I represent. I'd be open and willing to have a membership if I felt the interest of the community that I represent there. So I think folks are more open. I remember one time there was a person that working there, Quasi. You might remember this conversation, and I was like, "Man, it's dope." And he was like, "You talking about dope?" I'm like, "No, bro." And it just show you the disconnect, right? And disconnect is not a bad thing, but are we willing to either hire or bring people on? I remember Khary used to do stuff there, right? So how are we?
Back in the day,
utilizing that, because like that same person I was talking to, I was like, okay, you're bringing people in, great, and there's only a certain population that's going to come there. So let's do something over here. So now we're able to bridge those gaps, because ultimately, like I said, we end up competing against each other whether we realize it or not. And I think everybody's valuable, everybody plays a role. The problem is the intentionality that's lacking in trying to design and create the type of program to service the type of stuff, because we all do it. Where it's kind of like rappers and hip hop being producers, right? They, oh man, I can't wait to rap on your beat, but I can't wait you to rap on my beat. Never happens, and until they see each other again 6 months, a year later, and they say the same thing, but versus like, man, let's meet up, let's make it happen. But also, and I think that's where we're so caught up in our silos. And as a result of our silos, we create this certain image or perception of a use, because there's a perception of a Yusef, there's a perception of a Lord, whether it's true or not. And the only way we tear these perceptions down is by us working more together and building each other out to be able to expose. Because in my perception, what most people don't know, I'm not, even though I'm like public speaking, I don't like public speaking. I don't. I hate it. I'm a very shy person. I'm a very introvert. I have some antisocial behavior shit that
Very much so.
I'm still working through, right?
Very much so.
But again, and I bring those things up, if the more that we work in engaging each other, the more balance that we can create. Like I use the F word very rarely, and that F word is friend. As very few people that I really consider a friend, because we haven't built those type of relationships. I would like to use it more, but also I have trust issues like many of us do.
All right, and with that, definitely the man we spoke about. No, you might as well hold that mic because we want to make sure we get all of it. All right, here we go. Quasi the Shed, definitely friend of the crew. Here we go.
Today is the 5th day of Kwanzaa. Purpose needed. What would you, in this context of haves and have-nots, what should we focus on as our purpose?
I think our purpose is should be focused on resolving the internal contradiction that we have with each other. And so, as some of my OGs in Oakland, Panthers, veteran Panthers taught me when I started going out there and hanging with them, all contradictions are not antagonistic. All contradictions are not antagonistic. And the more we're able to get in a room and have conversation with each other, the better off we can see that we're more in line. We have values. There are some differences around some things, and then you've always emphasized the ideological struggle, and that's not a bad thing, but we need to have those conversations, and because the worst decisions I've made in this work that I do is a result of me thinking as an individual. The worst decisions I've made has been a result as me making those decisions just as an individual, not having a community to go talk to, whether it's my mother, my sisters, or other people in the community, and to be able to balance that off. Like, hey, Duggan want me to do such and such. And we're making these conversations or these decisions in silos, even though the intent may be good, but the impact. And I think that's the where our purpose and our need has to be right now is recentering ourselves.
All right, just adding on to something you said, you sparked something. You talked about antagonistic relationships. Yes. We also know that that's in context of haves and have not. We always judge and we assessing leadership practices. What is antagonistic? What would be an antagonistic relationship? What would be a non-antagonistic relationship, and why?
All right, great question. So, fucking, I'm just gonna be real honest, authentic. Some of you guys know Chef Jones, Chef Phil Jones. So him and I had a very antagonistic relationship at one point. All right, actually, right in here. It was this year in February. So he used to own this building right here. The Crockett store, it was given to him, and we would have a conversation like, "Man, what you trying to do with it? What you trying to do with it?" And I was asking from the purpose of trying to be supportive. And we ended up having a big old brawl, not physical, but a broad conversation about it. And we ended up resolving it, but the relationship was never the same. And before my mother passed, she like, "What do you think he sold the building?" Like, I think he did. Kind of find he sold the building. But in that in one of the conversations, he told me, I'm ultimately give this institution back to the community. Like, all right, bet. That sounds dope. And he came in here, and I didn't know at the time he had been drinking. So I was like, "Man, what's up, man? Why you tell me you sold the building? Woo, woo, woo." And I don't owe you shit. And at the time, I was going through the passing of my mother. It was that happened January 25th. So this is February.
So I don't know if I say that to you, sir.
Right. So I was like, "Man, you know what? You can turn around, hit the door, man, if I smack the shit out you."
So Yusef, I know.
And so at that time, I'm like, fuck him, and fuck him. And I don't have a problem with beefing with a motherfucker. Like, I come out of gang banging mentality. So that's easy to do. Fight and gang bang, right? But then as you get older and mature, like, are what we fighting over, is it really worth a fight? So I ended up running to Phil this past summer at an event. Prior to running to him, I was already wrestling. The thing that I did was put myself in Phil's shoes. One, as an elderly black man, as I mentioned earlier, the struggles to have an institution, to not only to have it, but to try to build it. Trying to out here, you hustling for money. People telling you they gonna do this and don't do a goddamn thing. Like I've been lied to more on this side than I've ever been lied in the streets. I've met more false promises than I've ever met in my life than on this side, right? And I don't know these directly from Phil, but I can only imagine what I've experienced, what he's possibly experienced. And here's the problem that from black men to black men and just black people in general, we're afraid to share our black vulnerability with each other, which creates a lot of the tension or a lot of the antagonistic behavior to each other because who are you to question me? But it's really like, just, man, I failed. I couldn't do it. And this is where like keeping it, like we talk about keeping it real, can we keep it authentic? And I expressed to him like, man, I apologize if I say anything offend you. Like you and me, you ain't supposed to be enemies. Like there's we shouldn't be beefing, man. Like you did what you did, and he was like, man, you said you smacked the shit out of me. Like, but you also said I owe you a motherfucking comment. Like, what you think I'm gonna say? But again, trying to think forward, and so that was like an antagonistic relationship. Like, are we best of friends? No, we're not best of friends, but there's a mutual respect. I've always valued the brother because here's the thing: we've had a working history. He worked when I called on him for stuff. He showed up when he needed stuff. Because Phil, again, he's very resourceful in the work that he do. He had food. Like if I couldn't get to it, I called my mama. My mama would go over there. We get and we distribute it to the community. Like so, that's working through our antagonistic relationship to being non-antagonistic, but then also just being like you don't have to like everybody. We all know that, but I can dislike a motherfucker, but still respect you, or you can still respect me. But it's getting into values where the issues is, and I think. Do we have the maturity? Because again, it goes back to a lot of people who have an issue with me is because of how I may fuck up something for them, or the perception I may fuck up something. Because no one I've had direct conversations with, or to have a direct collision with. I mean, because give it an example, like someone wanted this past summer because of what we do at the annual backpack event. Somebody wanted to partner with us to do an event, and I underestimated that they thought. By having me part of the event that we was going to duplicate the backpack event. I never signed up for that shit. I offered the space for free, didn't charge. And then when we didn't get the numbers that they saw, they was mad as hell. And they was talking behind my back to my coworker and all type of shit, I'm like, what the fuck? What's going on? Like, well, we thought you was going to get like, no, that wasn't what this was about. And so part of those antagonistic relationships is it gets broke down based upon people's perception. Because in this work, two people try to use you, or people say misuse you. And again, I don't have a problem being used, but don't misuse me. Don't try to exploit me. Because again, and this goes back to what white hegemony, what capitalism does to us. It puts a pressure on us where we're trying to outperform ourselves versus performing together.
Yeah. A predatory thought process.
Correct.
All right, here we go. I know we got some more questions. Grab the mic.
But no, just for one, thank you for the state of Black Detroit. It's great what you're doing. You know what I'm saying? It's very necessary. So this whole entire speech was informative, and essentially it was a call to action from what I hear. With that being said, you mentioned we have pretty much everything we need.
Correct.
What exactly would you a plan of action if you had to give somebody who's listening some next steps and what we can do as a community to move forward? What would those steps be?
That's a dope question. State of Black Detroit is not my idea. It's not my brainchild. It is Khary's. Detroit is a different brainchild. I'm just a tool instrument in helping him achieve that. Next steps is like one of the things that we're talking on a lower level that we need to get to a higher level is this summer is doing a State of Black Detroit Summit. Doing a State of Black Detroit Summit. Again, all of us are in Detroit. We're all in different pocket conversations. We hear the same thing, what it used to be or what it should be, blah, blah, blah. Why we ain't doing this or why we should be doing this, blah, blah, blah. So if we can pull our intellectual capacity together and help design that. And so the vision would be to do a 3-day thing where a 4-day over weekend hosting at our different sites. utilizing, but also getting into to the weeds and being mindful over that weekend. We're not trying to solve everything, but trying to put some things into place. But that's a long-term vision. But in the short-term vision is cultivating and building those deeper relationships that we have with each other. In terms of again, this cannot exist by itself. What you have cannot exist by itself, and everybody what we have cannot. So how do we collaborate in a very meaningful way to achieve what we're trying to achieve? And that requires for us to build the type of relationships that's necessary. Because again, a lot of times we only come to the table because we don't like Duggan. That's not sustainable. And we realize that none of us have very authentic relationships with each other. And it's because of a lot of these perceptions. And then because you didn't like Duggan, you liked it Archer. Right. And like, oh shit, like I didn't know that, but you never asked me who else I like, right? Or who I didn't like. But if you haven't created a type of relationship to really learn somebody, you don't know who you're in bed with, and which creates the domino effect where it does now, because there's a lot of people, man, I don't like Yusef. Or Yusef didn't do, but what he didn't do though? He let you use the space. You know, he did such and such for you, like. And these are the things that we're so quick to tear each other down, and we have to understand clearly how self-hatred operates. There's a difference between this, because I've been disappointed, and I'm going to continue to be disappointed. And I'm very mindful. There's a lot of people that I don't fuck with and I don't like. And I'll tell you, like, I don't fuck with them. I don't like, doesn't mean that you shouldn't like them. Because my relationship may not be the same relationship that you have with them. That's maturity. But I had to get to that mature space to be able to see that. And I think, again, the creating more intentionality of how to work together. And like I say, moving us out of this, the individuals are making decisions about a majority Black city. Because each and every one of them in this room and on this audience say we represent Detroit. We represent Black Detroit. So we represent a majority Black city. And that's too much weight for one individual, one organization to carry by themselves, to make tough decisions. And the more we're open and communicating with each other, and again, you still may make the decision, we may not agree, but you brought it to the table to get advice.
Yeah, I think the reason that the ideas kind of spoke to me to do this with Yusef is because I was like, I haven't, you know, we were doing up to last year, you know, I'd sometimes drop off some speakers, I sometimes do a video project, but we didn't do anything like we used to together all the time. And especially being that COVID-19 was happening and it was from the shadows of COVID-19, I was like, we need to do something that's unique and dynamic that we can build upon for years, as I've been thinking, like decade thinking. So that was the seed. And now it's blossomed to so much more. Like Yusef reached out to me and said, hey, it was people that really checked that out and wanted to have some other discussions. It was other people that wanted to reach out and have other discussions with me about some of the things I could do. So it was a platform in community, in capability, in capacity, us doing something different than like, if let's give something online. And now it's in person, and I see this growing to more because the summit's going to be really big. It's going to be really big. And now we got one of the for show soldiers in effect, Truth, coming to the mic.
Peace.
Grab the mic.
My question is going back to when you were speaking about the elders and bridging the gap of that has been made by many different reasons. But what would be one of the ways that you would say would be a way that we can start to bridge that gap between the older generation or elders and some of the youth out here? Because in my mindset, the gap to me is getting wider and wider by the day, and I think that the work needs to be done to kind of close that gap, because I believe that is one of the only ways that we can move forward and progress, is if we have the wisdom of the elders and some of that fearlessness of the youth who don't haven't necessarily been through certain things and where they keep that fearlessness. How do we bridge that gap between the elders and the youth?
I think some of it's being bridged in pockets. where folks have different relationships. I know Carolyn the other day mentioned Mama Neb wants to be more in tune through her, what she represents of elders of what's going on. So there's a conversation around doing something every month with some folks. But I think it's such a large dynamic, right? So what elders are we talking about? Like right now we got Kwanzaa going on 7 days. There's been a slew of elders over there. Is that the same elders that we over here? Is still young people over there. So how do we create a central space around a certain group of folks, but also again be intentional? Because a lot of times it's just about inviting people. Because a lot of times people are like, why you wasn't there? I wasn't invited. And the more that we can be able to address that and create, because now we have more institutions at our disposal than we probably had in a long time in the history of Detroit to be able to do those things, indoor, outdoor. So it's just how to create the opportunities to create the conducive of the environment, but also we need to know, because it's like neighborhoods, right? Where you grew up, and if I come over there and you're like, well, I'm about to go across the road, man, hold up, you got to know this when you go over there. Mm-hmm. We don't deal the stuff beneath the surface, because there's some people that don't like each other. There's certain elders that don't like each other, right? And I'm bringing it up to how do we mitigate that? How do we manage those type of things to create the environment that's conducive? Or again, and then some of it we may resolve, I mean, some of it may not. So, okay, we know such and such don't get together, so we're going to do it over here. This is creating that type of strategy, but also to your point, and part of the answer to that question, we have to demand that in our community. And demanding that we recognize that that's a value. But then like what Khary talked about earlier, and I built on it, like my fondest memory was hanging with my grandfather. My grandfather, my grandfather was, he was 60 when my mother was born. My mother's 24 when he passed. So he was pretty much, and he wasn't capable of moving around when I was a kid, but until he couldn't move around no more, when he would get his pension check, we would catch a cab, we would go to McDonald's, he would order a fish sandwich, I would order a Big Mac, we would leave at McDonald's, we would go to the barbershop, he get his haircut, I get my haircut. It's very simple, but it was so much more there, right? And I'm thinking again, if any of us think about our grandfathers, our grandmother, our grandmother, great grandmothers, whatnot, how do we duplicate that beyond just from a family, but in the political structure of a struggle? Can you imagine what that impacted? But also we have to set what type of standard. Like I remember, this is elder over here in the neighborhood and shit, right? Or in the community. I remember coming over to the spot, right? And he's a young activist coming up. And as soon as I walk in the door, the fucking weed smoke hit me quicker than anything else, right? And I'm like, damn, like this shit felt like a trap house. It felt like a weed house. And I'm not saying like you can't smoke weed, but it's just the image in my mind. What are we conveying to each other? Has that lowered the standard? Is there a certain way, like we always say, it's certain shit you do over here, and there's certain shit you do over there. And then when they get confused of what the two is, the struggle get confused. When you are elder and you kind of act like what they say, you're like, I'm your mama, I ain't your friend. When our elders become our peers, it's a problem.
All right, so with that, I think I don't know if Sylvia, you got a question?
Yeah.
All right, come on, step to the mic. This will be our last comment. Oh no, it's cool. It's cool. Okay. Hey, no, we need that. We need that energy.
I just got here.
Pick up the mic. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just got here, and just a little bit that I was listening to, my thought is, what could we do collectively to become a network community where we can network and build communication networks where we can get to our youth and our seniors and bring us together to do this intergenerational relationship, because it's a lot of lonely grandmas and grandpas, and there's a lot of children that don't have fathers and grandmothers, and we need that connection also with the consciousness and the education that it's going to take to
Right.
build the family and the villages that we once had.
Right.
So I'm just trying to throw out some ideas of what we can do to make this happen, because we need more bigger communication networks among ourselves. We got to be the walking trees, the walking billboards and the newspapers, as well as airways. Thank you.
And I would just real push on that. Like I said earlier, as African people, we're holistic people. Like a lot of times we don't even realize, we say elders, we say young people. What about the parents?
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't fit in the equation. And we have to create, and each of us deal with different circumstances, but we have to create an opportunity where all of us are engaged in this. We got to create that type of ecosystem where, because ultimately the parent is the go between the elders and the kids. And so if you ask me, the greatest pain I ever felt when the pain I saw in my mother's eyes as a child. How, when my mother was happy, I was happy. When she was sad, I was sad, because my world is being shaped by my mother. So again, in the equation of we're just serving the elders and the youth, then where are the parents at in this equation, in this conversation? It's just something to think of. And I don't think we say it, we mean that, but then we don't necessarily realize how we're describing, because we're erasing them out of the conversation. And then again, this is a European concept where, in particular, we can go back to kind of like from a social justice standpoint, grants and all that had designed to some of us, I want to serve the elders, I want to serve the young people, which all are commendable, but also how do we serve our community? Because ultimately, there's a saying in the nonprofit world, when you're writing your grants or whatever, or the tagline of at-risk youth. Mm-hmm. I'm at risk because I live in a fucking at-risk community. Not only youth at risk, everybody in the fucking community is at risk because of certain of a predator environment. So again, this is where important the analysis that we're using is conducive. But I mean, I'm not negating. There's certain things that young people need. Absolutely. There's certain things parents need, and there's certain things adult needs, but it has to be within the framework of our whole community, where our message is every life or every Black life is valuable.
That's deep. And with that, we're going to get ready to eat lunch here in person. If you are at home, hopefully you're at home warmed up and definitely rocking. I guess everything's warming up a little bit more now, but we will be doing this again the summer. We're looking forward to what we're going to do with this in the summer. Myself, I know it'll be me, Quasi, Yusef, and I know a lot more sisters, because I already know that comment's coming next. We'll be involved and in the mix of this. Definitely. Thank you so much for tuning in. Peace.
Peace.